What I want to do right at the start of Newstrack tonight is to show you what happened in Alibag. Alibag, just off Mumbai, where a lot of the rich and the famous of Mumbai have their fancy pads and farmhouses, is where the cyclone made landfall this afternoon with immense intensity. Our reporters were on the ground and they captured the wrath of Cyclone Nisarga. Here's our lead story tonight.
Strong winds, heavy rains, roofs blown up, drifting ships in rough sea. This is what the landfall spot in south of Maharashtra's Alibag witnessed as Cyclone Nisarga roared in. The severe cyclonic storm started its landfall at 1 p.m. and the process went on till 3:30 p.m. India Today was tracking the eye of the storm. Met Department said the landfall was close to southeast of Alibag, 75 kilometers southeast of Mumbai and 65 kilometers west of Pune.
This severe cyclonic storm, Nisarga, has already crossed Raigad district near Alibag between 12:30 to 2:30, and now we are experiencing the post-landfall effects.
21 NDRF teams were deployed in Maharashtra to rescue people and carry out evacuation from low-lying areas even before the storm hit.
Good amount of work has been done by the security agencies here. A good coordination that I'm seeing, good synergy that I'm seeing on ground zero. As the low-lying areas, there are around 100 villagers here. They have been moved up to the relief centers. The boats have been moved to the higher up areas so that these villagers do not face destruction to their property as well.
While the cyclone left a trail of destruction with uprooted trees, blown off roofs and damaged vehicles, the fury largely spared coastal Maharashtra. Bureau Report, India Today.
After Alibag, I now want to shift attention to what happened in Mumbai city. Our reporters spread out across the city through the storm before and even after to capture how Cyclone Nisarga impacted India's financial capital. Here's our report from the Mumbai Bureau.
Trees uprooted. Bus stop crashing to the ground. Electric poles ripped out of the ground. Cyclone Nisarga crossed Mumbai and neighbouring Navi Mumbai area on Wednesday. Nisarga is the first June cyclone to hit the city in more than a century.
As you can see, the wind speed is increasing, and according to the IMD, the wind speed right now is about 100 kilometers per hour to 110 kilometers per hour. Now, this kind of a wind speed of a cyclonic storm is something which Mumbai city, the maximum city, is not at all used to.
Cyclone Nisarga made landfall near Alibag, 100 kilometers south of Mumbai, bringing in heavy rains and gushing winds. Maximum damage was caused to trees, with several being uprooted across the city.
We are at CST area. Here you can see this big tree fallen on the main road. Fortunately, there was no loss of life as there is not much traffic on the road. But these kind of tree fall incidents have been reported at multiple locations in Mumbai.
The force of the wind was strong enough to bring down signboards.
Several signboards have fallen on this particular bridge, and the wind is gradually increasing a lot. You can't even stand at this particular place where we are right now.
Fishermen were left scrambling in the wake of the storm, moving their boats up the shore to safety.
कम से कम यहाँ पे हमारे 10 से 12 बोट चली गई ऊपर और बाकी बोटें थी सब हम लोगों ने वो खाड़ी साइड में रखी है।
तो अब आप लोग ये अभी क्यों कर रहे हैं, पहले क्यों नहीं कर लिया आप लोगों ने?
हम लोगों को चेतावनी मिली थी पर पानी उतना भर नहीं रहा था, इसकी वजह हम लोग ने रुक गए थे यहाँ पे।
Section 144 was imposed across the city to restrict movement of people. Vehicular movement was not allowed on the Bandra-Worli sea link. People in low-lying areas were evacuated. 8 NDRF teams were deployed in the city to carry out relief and rescue operations. The BMC set up a disaster management cell to monitor situation on the ground.
These are the screens of the CCTV cameras placed across Mumbai, and every beach and every facility is being monitored like this. Whenever there is going to be any kind of a disaster, if the tree falls or the road gets blocked or because of the rain there is a water logging, the disaster management cell will alert the fire brigade officials who are standing here. At the same time, the police officials will be alerted with these lines here which has been mentioned, these telephone lines.
Keeping in view the inclement weather, flight operations from the city were suspended till 7 p.m. While the maximum city feared the worst, Nisarga spared it, weakening by the time it reached Mumbai. Bureau Report, India Today.
So before I get to what could happen if a cyclonic storm actually strikes Mumbai, I want to show you what's happening at this time in Mumbai and along the western coast. So here is a live satellite picture which shows that the cyclonic storm has actually moved in. Around Nasik is where the greatest intensity is. And if we actually go back on this, so this is what happened this afternoon around 1 p.m. and you can see the level of intensity around Mumbai. That's what you see here is the eye of the storm, the dark purple, and then there was landfall soon after that around 2 p.m. and then as we go further you see the cyclone moving in further and further inland. So if I just go forward to the next day, this is 11 p.m. tonight, so it comes in towards Jalgaon, Akola, Nashik, and then as we go in even further, it keeps moving in. This is the 4th, that's tomorrow. It keeps moving in. Obviously, the intensity reduces substantially, but the Mumbai spared the wrath of Cyclone Nisarga. Really appreciate, Jatin Singh, you joining us and explaining in the way that you did how Mumbai was very lucky. But will it be lucky next time as well? There is mounting academic literature to suggest that climate change changes the possibility of a severe cyclonic storm actually coming and striking Mumbai city. So in just a moment from now, I'll start that important conversation with author Amitav Ghosh and also Professor Adam Sobel, who's at Columbia University, New York. He's done an academic paper, Tropical Cyclone Hazard to Mumbai in the Recent Historical Climate. We'll get into this. I spent the day reading it. It's a very fascinating paper. But before that, I want to go across to Sahil Joshi. He's our Mumbai bureau chief. And Sahil, around 9:45 p.m. is when high tide is expected. What is the IMD telling you about the possibility of rainfall? And also, what happens from here? Pankaj Khelkar is in Alibag, which is where the cyclone struck and made landfall. So Pankaj, we saw some very dramatic pictures of you in the middle of the cyclone. Explain to our viewers what's happening in Alibag at this moment.
So Rahul, as of now in Alibag it's pitch dark. There is no power and there is no chance of restoring the power through the night. The NDRF teams are there, and when I spoke to the NDRF, one of the NDRF officers, he said that he is going to have a meeting with the district collectorate because he has been called there and they are going to evaluate about those damages and how to start the relief work. But as of now, the relief work won't be happening through the night, but next morning, like tomorrow, the relief work will start. The trees that are being uprooted, the electric poles that have bent, and the structures that have been damaged, and people whose hutments, like the fishermen's, almost 150 to 200 hutments have been damaged. That is what is being claimed by the fishermen. Now it's raining heavily over here, although I am standing in a shade, but yes, it's raining heavily. The winds have subsided, but still there are winds going on. The speed might be somewhere 30 to 40 kilometers per hour, not like what it was during the afternoon time, 110 to 120, when trees were getting uprooted, their branches were broken, and everything was going haywire. Now, although it's raining, but still it's somewhat peaceful.
Pankaj Kelka, thank you for joining us. Aslam Sheikh, Guardian Minister of Mumbai, you were with us on the show yesterday. Is there a sense of respite? Bach gaye? The SkyMet MD was saying that if the cyclone's path had just been a couple of kilometers different from what it actually was, the cyclone could have done heavy damage in Mumbai. What are you picking up at this time, and are you very relieved by the way the day went?
Definitely, we are very much relieved, and by God's grace, we had a good luck that Mumbai was saved. Otherwise, you could have seen what damages they would have done to Mumbai. And without coming to Mumbai, almost 150 trees are damaged, I mean, it's uprooted, and so many houses that chapras were gone over. And in Mumbai, whenever the monsoon comes, there are people who terraces are leaking, so they keep the monsoon shed and all that's so flown away. So I think so, but we were prepared for that. That's why what we did, the first thing, we had a very long meeting yesterday, and we took all the precaution, whatever was necessary. The first thing, we went for arranging of hospitals, proper things don't go up, so that we had a proper lighting system over there. So we arranged all the generators in each and every hospital. The second was, we were knowing that much of the trees are going to get uprooted. So in 26 ward, wherever we have the municipal office in Mumbai, we kept 30 people ready, so that any trees get uprooted, we can just cut off and get the road map cleared. And we evacuated the people who are staying on the coastal. As the fishermen, they stay at the coastal, their houses are very close to the sea. So we evacuated those people. And the fourth target was, wherever the landslide happens, every year there is a monsoon, and whenever the rain goes in a high city, then time the landslide happens. So we evacuated people from there. So we were much prepared, but you know, this storm, it would have definitely come into the Mumbai, a big damage would have taken place.
You know, Mr. Aslam Sheikh, I want to request you to stay back for that important conversation with Amitav Ghosh and Professor Adam Sobel. And I want you to jump in with your views as the Guardian Minister of Mumbai. Listen to what they're saying about what could happen if the cyclonic storm actually strikes Mumbai, and then you tell us how you assess the level of preparation in Mumbai. But before I start, I want to go across to Sahil Joshi. Walk us through the prospects of high tide later tonight, and what the IMD is saying about whether it will rain, and what's it looking like in Mumbai. What are all your reporters telling you, Sahil? Okay, I don't hear Sahil. I want to go across now to Ira Dubey. She joins us. She's an actress. She's listening in to this conversation. Is there a sense, Ira, as a Mumbai citizen, that today was a day of great relief and respite, that there was a huge amount of apprehension, but in the end, the cyclone went and struck in Alibag, which has far fewer people and not the kind of population density that many parts of Bombay does?
Well, yes, I think that you're right, Rahul. Firstly, thank you for having me. A rather unfortunate circumstances for being here. I think, yes, we were heaving a sigh of relief, but, you know, the pandemic has caused a lot of two things to happen to a lot of us, even civilians all over the world, particularly here in Bombay, given how bad things are. And that is the fear psychosis and a sense of resilience. So I think when the news came out yesterday, and I commend everybody who gave us such, you know, detailed sort of guidelines and warnings, the anxiety kicked in, you know. So all of us prepared ourselves, and we shuttered our windows, and we took out all our glass pieces, and we, you know, sort of prepared for the worst, particularly because we're sitting at home and we're already under lockdown. So I think that, yes, I think we were very relieved, but I'm very interested to hear about the conversation that you're going to have next with Mr. Ghosh, because just as Mr. Gates predicted the pandemic, I think that nature is crying, and we have to take notice. We really have to sit up and take notice.
So stay with us, and I'd love for you to join in as a Mumbaikar and ask a couple of questions to Amitav Ghosh and Professor Sobel as well. But I want to get a word in from Sahil, whom I'm told is now through with us. Sahil, high tide later tonight around 9:45, and also what's the IMD saying about the prospects of rainfall? Are we certain the worst is behind us?
Yeah, it looks like that the worst is behind us at this point of time, because it's not raining and the wind speed is completely not as it was expected earlier. But one thing is very clear, that the whole thought of a cyclone hitting Mumbai was completely a scary thought. What we can clearly see today, what happened. If the wind speed would have been more than 110 kilometers per hour, then I can't imagine that how the large slum area in Mumbai would have survived. So it is very important now that the BMC must think about managing the cyclone as well, because earlier the Mumbai had never hit with any cyclone. Even this cyclone did not hit Mumbai, but it did hit Alibag, which is hardly 100 kilometers from Mumbai. And this is for the first time that the west coast in Maharashtra was getting hit by a severe cyclone. So that is something which now the administration will also have to think of. Luckily today the Mumbai was safe because the rainfall was not much as it was expected, and secondly the wind speed was also not as alerted by the IMD, that was up to 120 kilometers per hour. So that's why the Mumbai was completely saved, and what preparations BMC had done, it went completely untested.
Thanks Sahil for joining us. I want to welcome now our two special guests who are joining us for this broadcast, where we're looking at what could happen if a cyclone actually struck Mumbai city. I want to welcome first renowned author Amitav Ghosh. We were saved from the great derangement today. That's the title of his 2016 book, The Great Derangement, Climate Change and the Unthinkable. And the gentleman on the right side of your screen is Professor Adam Sobel. He is an atmospheric scientist and a professor of Earth and Environmental Science at Columbia University in New York. He's written a very fine paper that I read today, Tropical Cyclone Hazard to Mumbai in the Recent Historical Climate, which looks at what could happen if a cyclone strikes and assesses the prospect of that happening. So before I kickstart this conversation, I just want to show you a broad sense of whether Mumbai is actually prepared to deal with a worst nightmare scenario playing out. Take a look at this report.
It was at low tide in the afternoon when Nisarga crossed from sea to land. The cyclone's landfall was at Maharashtra's Alibag. The land was whipped by heavy rain as winds passed, traveling 120 kilometers by the hour. Categorized a severe cyclonic storm, Nisarga is the first cyclone to hit Mumbai and its surrounding areas in over 100 years. This means that no one alive in the region had ever witnessed such fury before. India's western coast is considered at low risk of tropical cyclones when compared to its eastern coastline. And it is the region's weather dynamics that makes Nisarga an anomaly.
People on the west coast don't expect cyclones and neither does the administration at the center, state and the district administration understand that evacuation needs to be done, how warnings are to be done and what kind of construction is there, because you prepare for cyclones over a generation.
Even those cyclones which have originated in the Arabian Sea often weaken as they travel up the coastline and have in the past skirted densely populated cities like Mumbai.
Mumbai is a city of over 20 million people. How are you going to evacuate Mumbai?
Although every year Mumbai witnesses an urban nightmare when torrential monsoon rains submerge the city for millions of Mumbaikars, Nisarga is still a first. Coupled with the struggle of a city fighting off COVID-19, leading experts dub this as a complex disaster.
this one throws up a war on many fronts, not just two. So if you just look at the COVID context, there's evacuations taking place at a huge scale. And how do you evacuate people and shelter them with physical distancing, measures being followed? At the same time, there are existing COVID hospitals, isolation centers, quarantine centers in the path of the cyclone where we can't afford to lose power, water, and other facilities.
Tin roofs of buildings were blown away and ships were seen drifting away due to strong cyclonic winds. Trees were also uprooted at several places, highlighting the inequality the city hosts, both physically, in terms of land, and social.
Clearly, the high-rise are not that vulnerable, I should say, for the simple reason that they're designed for huge wind loads and all kind of wind pressures. But I think the slums are clearly the ones that suffer the most because they occupy low lands of the city. Generally speaking, they're on the edges of these land-water relationship, which is kind of this nebulous area.
42% of Mumbaikars live in slums. I mean, you cannot ignore that fact. You go to Bandra, BKC, and there is a large drain. People live on the drain. We are not counting these people. Where will they go?
The entire space along the Mithi River, what was once a space that kind of allowed the water to swell, and maybe at some point we can talk about it. All these lands have now been occupied by slums, and because there is no assigned space for them in the city. So they become extremely vulnerable.
It is a tough year in Mumbai. Like Kolkata, which suffered a cyclone barely a few days ago, it is now the turn of this city to pull itself together, because the cyclone may have passed, but a deadly virus still remains to be tackled.
Joining me now live on the Newstrack is renowned award-winning author Amitav Ghosh. He wrote in 2016 the rather prophetic book, The Great Derangement, Climate Change and the Unthinkable, except that we were spared the Great Derangement today. And thank God for that. Also with us is Professor Adam Sobel. He's an atmospheric scientist and Professor of Earth and Environmental Science at New York's Columbia University. Amitav Ghosh, are you relieved in some senses that the Great Derangement was spared today, and that while a lot of what you're saying could potentially, you brought people alive to the idea and the threat of a cyclone hitting Mumbai, but mercifully today wasn't the day for that?
Yes, absolutely. Well, hello Rahul, and thank you for having me on your show. Yes, I think Mumbai really dodged the bullet today. I mean, even though this cyclone had actually weakened, it's a huge relief. It's a huge relief to all of us who've been following it. It's a huge relief to me that my friends in Mumbai have been spared. So, and again, there's a positive aspect to it. I think it's woken people in Mumbai up to the possibility of being hit by a major cyclone.
Professor Adam Sobel, your paper, and you collaborated with Amitav Ghosh for the book that he wrote, is very interesting because it brings out what might happen if a severe cyclonic storm were actually to strike Mumbai city. So for those who haven't read your paper and aren't aware of your work, why don't you give us the gist of what kind of Mayday-like situation they'd have to prepare for? What would happen if a cyclone hit Mumbai?
Right. So our paper didn't actually describe what the impacts would be on the city. We're just meteorologists. So the main conclusion of our paper was just that it is possible for a severe cyclone, by which I mean one quite a bit stronger than Nisarga was, to hit Mumbai. It hasn't happened in the modern history of the city. It may have happened in past centuries. My guess is that it probably has, because very severe cyclones have hit Gujarat and other spots nearby. So that's the main thing. And a much stronger cyclone could produce winds much higher than Nisarga did. And also, I think the biggest threat to Mumbai would be a storm surge. So in this case, there wasn't a large storm surge, and it was, whatever there was well to the south of the city. But if the storm had hit further north and had been stronger, it could have driven a strong storm surge which would bring the ocean onto the land. So that's a different kind of flooding than what Mumbai has experienced in recent years in 2005 and 2017 and 2019, and could conceivably even be worse. In other words, deeper water coming quicker and in different places. So with so many low-lying areas, if you were to combine such a powerful storm surge with very high winds, it could be extremely destructive, and the number of people that could be affected by it in Mumbai would be extremely large, as you've been saying.
Amitav Ghosh, apart from writing fiction, you've also researched the prospect of climate change triggering a severe cyclone in Mumbai. Can you give us your best sense of why you believe that the kind of cyclones that we've seen in the Bay of Bengal, which tend to strike near Orissa or Bangladesh, could start being seen in the Arabian Sea as well? Because so far the general sense has been that such cyclones don't happen on the western coast, and most certainly not near Mumbai.
Well, I think Adam is perhaps the best person to explain that to you, but he'll explain to you, as he explained to me a long time ago, that the research now shows that in fact cyclones are probably going to decrease in the Bay of Bengal and increase in the Arabian Sea. There's been some research on that. So the patterns are changing, and they're changing because of climate change. I mean, this is one of the impacts of climate change.
Could you explain that in greater length, Professor Sobel? Why is it that you're saying that cyclones could be coming down in their frequency in the Bay of Bengal and actually increasing in the Arabian Sea, which typically doesn't see super cyclones?
Right. First of all, it's not entirely true that the Arabian Sea doesn't see very powerful cyclones. In 1998, for example, a very strong one hit Gujarat, about category 3 on the U.S. scales. We would call that a major hurricane in the United States, much stronger than Nisarga. It's true they've been rare. I'm not sure about the cyclones decreasing in the Bay of Bengal. I'm not sure about that, but what the climate models do predict is that with global warming, the Arabian Sea, because of changes in the monsoon, the Arabian Sea will warm more than the Bay of Bengal or other parts of the tropical oceans. And so that relatively speaking, well, both in absolute numbers, there will be more cyclones and stronger ones in the Arabian Sea than in the past. And also the relative balance will shift so that there will be, whereas now the great majority of them are the Bay of Bengal and very few of the Arabian Sea will come up a bit more. And there is a study by some of my colleagues at Princeton a few years ago in the U.S. that argued not only that that's a future projection, but that the last few years, which have been seen an anomalously large number of storms in the Arabian Sea, that is already attributable to global warming. That was specifically a conclusion for the post-monsoon season, and this is the pre-monsoon. But I think, the same broad interpretation probably applies here.
Amitav Ghosh, the other prospect that you are drawing people's attention to is the fact that Mumbai actually has a nuclear reactor very close by, and you're worried about a Fukushima-like disaster. So can you explain why the Bhabha Atomic Research Center and its location is such a major area of concern for you?
I should also point out that Mumbai has not one but two nuclear reactors in its vicinity. One is, of course, the Bhabha Atomic Research Center, but a little further up is the Tarapur Nuclear Research Center, they have a reactor there. I actually wrote to a friend of mine who's a specialist on this subject of, their vulnerability to flooding. And he said that very little material is available on this subject, so he couldn't really actually tell me much about it. But yes, I do think that's a concern. Look, in all these things, Adam and I are very careful not to try and create panic, not to try and scare people and that sort of thing. That's not my intention at all, but I think this should be an area of concern.
Adam, do you want to build on that? Why is it that you think, given where the Bhabha Atomic Research Center is located, that it could be an area of concern, and you're drawing attention to what happened in Fukushima? And most importantly, what do you think policymakers in Mumbai need to do to try and prevent that from happening?
I don't know a lot about the specifics of that nuclear reactor, I'm embarrassed to say. I think Amitav should be the source on that for this interview. What I will say, though, is that what I do know is that In Mumbai, there has been and is ongoing a lot of development in some of the most vulnerable coastal areas around Tana Creek and along the coast, the new coast road, and so on. And so what we see now, and what we knew before, but this event makes it much more vivid, is that those areas are very vulnerable, and that it's very risky to build things along low-lying areas, along the coast, in wetlands and mangroves. Those are areas that, if possible, should be left undeveloped. It's very difficult in a global megacity with 20 million people in the greater metro area and great pressure for development. But there's high risk in these areas.
And I want to bring in now a Mumbaiker, actor Ira Dubey. She's listening into this conversation. I thought she'd have some concerns as a Mumbaiker, which she could take up with Professor Sobel and Amitav Ghosh. Ira.
Pleasure to be with both of you, very distinguished gentlemen. Again, in very unfortunate circumstances. I think listening to you, it's all been a very surreal experience, I think, in light of what is going on in the world with the pandemic and everything that's happening. But I think listening to you both right now, in big cities, there is a tendency to believe that we are invincible. So in terms of preparedness, even as just civilians and citizens of this city, what is it that we should be doing, really?
Well, if you're asking me, what I would say is that you have to have a disaster preparedness plan, and there are some disaster preparedness plans in place. So I don't know if there's one that addresses this particular scenario. I was actually quite favorably impressed by Aditya Thackeray's response to this cyclone threat. I mean, he was out there. Especially the pumping stations are very important. In Kolkata, when Cyclone Amphan hit my part of the city, which used to be flooded all the time, but now has pumping stations, we had no flooding this time. So that was really a mercy. But I do think that in the long run, certain major institutions do have to be relocated, to safer locations. I mean, Mumbai, as I wrote in my book, Mumbai represents an incredible concentration of risk. Because imagine if you had a major, if the storm surge had been different, and there had been flooding all over Colaba or whatever, the Reserve Bank would not be able to operate. The stock exchange would not be able to operate. In fact, India's entire financial system would shut down because Mumbai is just so important, such a big player in the Indian economy.
Professor Sobel, you write about a storm surge coming across, especially South Mumbai, from both sides. Describe that kind of a prospect and what can potentially be done to ward that off.
Yeah, I don't think we wrote about the surge specifically, but you're right. I mean, the surge could hit from both sides, from the estuary in Tana Creek and from the coast, and it can come rather quickly, although it could be forecast. I should say the IMD forecasts were good in this instance. I'm sorry, my phone is ringing. I'm afraid I have to let it ring. That in the long term, one of course can build defenses against it, but I don't know how practical that is. I think that's a big infrastructure project. The best thing would be to reduce development along the coast. But as your guest asked, and as Amitav said, I think the best thing that could be done in the short term is planning. I mean, individuals can have plans, can have disaster plans of what they'll do in the case of a major disaster, but really government has to have a plan. And we saw that in Hurricane Sandy here, where if you've thought through for years before, what you'll do in the case of a disaster, you can make better decisions than if you're trying to make it up on the spot. And I agree. I think the disaster response here was good in this case, but it wasn't the worst case scenario. And I just really hope that the authorities in Mumbai and Maharashtra and at the federal level have planned for or will plan for a much more severe event in Mumbai.
Amitav Ghosh, typically in India, we tend to plan for the last crisis. So in Mumbai, a lot of the planning has been for the kind of floods that we saw in the middle of the last decade. And that's what Mumbai is now geared up for. You looked at the whole aspect of whether Mumbai was prepared to deal with the cyclone. What did you find? What more would you like to see Uddhav Thackeray's government do?
Well, the best way to prepare for a cyclone is to evacuate people. But that's almost an impossible proposition for Mumbai because, it's 10, 15 million people that you would have to take out of the most exposed areas. But still, I do think that people should have some sort of plan in place for evacuation. As Adam was saying, individuals can make these plans, but also the government can make these plans. Certainly, there should be plans for taking people away from the most low-lying areas, So all of that should be planned out because, these scenarios are going to recur in the future. They're going to recur again and again.
Professor Sobel, do you want to end with this? You looked at the prospect of a cyclone actually hitting in a particular year or in a decade or 100 years. So what's your broad answer? Given the particular topography and geography of Mumbai, in your modeling, how likely is it that a super cyclone or severe cyclone will actually strike Mumbai city?
Right. So our conclusion was that a storm considerably more severe than this, let's say a major hurricane in the U.S. scale, 100 knot winds instead of the maybe 60 or something, that 60 or 70 that this one produced, which would be much more damaging, as we discussed. That's something that it depends on the model, but it's the average return period is a couple of 100 years, maybe. I mean, that it will happen about that often, but that's without accounting for climate change. So with climate change increasing the risk, it could be quite a bit. Could become quite a bit more likely than that in the future. So it's something that I think even now it's going to be a low probability in each given year, but the probability increases that sooner or later it's going to happen. And these are often the worst disasters are in places where the probability is low, but so people aren't used to it, and therefore the vulnerability is high because they're unprepared. So I think the best thing that could come out of this would be as if it really gets everyone's attention focused on the understanding that this is something that really could happen, even though Mumbai kind of dodged the bullet this time, but it might not next time.
Nobody really wants to be the prophet of doom, but I think what Professor Sobel and Amitav Ghosh have done is draw attention to what may happen if a cyclone strikes and thereby help citizens mount pressure on policymakers to ensure that Mumbai is better prepared. Ina Dubey, Amitav Ghosh and Professor Adam Sobel, for the work that you've done and for taking out time at such short notice and agreeing to join us on the Newstrack. Thank you very much. I am so glad that we were spared the great derangement, and I hope that it stays this way. Let this be a bullet that Mumbai dodges. And I like the fact that you say it could happen in a couple of 100 years. So that means, but you don't know when those couple of 100 years, when that 1 year in those 200 years may be, but let's just hope, and we're all relieved that Mumbai is safe and sound. Thank you very much for joining us on the Newstrack. Bye-bye. Hello everyone, this is Rahul Kanwal here. Hope you enjoyed this video. For the latest news and analysis, like and subscribe the India Today YouTube channel, and don't forget to press the bell icon to stay updated.